here we are, Saturday, and sports.
This is the Cross Section with Nate Lowe and David Edelstein.
David, how are you, man? Another weekend chat for us.
That was a very official salute. I was not expecting that.
Oh, the salute's kind of my thing, I guess. I don't know. But.
I used to do that when I would see people across a field walking around. I would always just kind of give them like a little like, "Hey, I see you over there," kind of thing. Yeah. I was not expecting that through a video chat. That was pretty cool.
That's my go-to. I do the same thing. So
I've been losing track of the days. That's what it is. But,
yeah, well, it was a busy week. I mean, I think the biggest thing that happened this week was the cancellation of school, and students aren't going to be going back to school, and spring championships go down. I mean, it was a crazy week. What did you have in your world?
I feel like this week has been the most crazy week, at least in sports, since the first week, like that first week in March. Not the first week in March, but the the 12th, 13th. 14th, 15th, 16th of March, which is like the end of the week into the beginning of the next week when the NBA stopped and all the leagues kind of postponed everything, and the state championships were postponed for winter. I feel like this has been the craziest week because every other day there's been something else happening. I mean, within this 1 week, we have Monday was when the state said that it was going to cancel the spring sport championships, which I guess we could start there, is not really it wasn't really a surprise. We didn't know when it was going to happen, but I guess at least I kind of felt like we knew this was going to happen, that at this point, if schools were going to come back on May 15th, that there wasn't necessarily going to be enough time for there to be enough of a season after practices and then sectionals and then a state championship before the end of June. I mean, it just seemed like it was kind of expected that by Monday at some point soon that the state was going to say, hey, like it doesn't make sense to try and have a state championship, but it makes sense to try and have some kind of playing if possible at that point.
I agree. And I think we were all expecting this, but the one thing that really stuck out to me was how much feedback I got about how people were still holding out hope that maybe something would happen. And as the week went on, that came out more and more, but I was just really surprised that people weren't just kind of saying, yeah, we expected this. And they were really hoping somehow that we were going to have a miracle. And I think a lot of the baseball and softball people were hoping that things would get pushed into the summer if they could just get started and get some traction and get back to school. And I think they really thought there was some possibilities there, but unfortunately it didn't work out.
Yeah, I mean, sports is full of hope, right? You are hoping your team wins. You're hoping that things happen. You want those moments, even within a game. Every moment's like you're holding on to that kind of hope for your team. And so it's not a surprise that people were hopeful that things would happen. I think that it seemed to me that the reaction of the state championships being canceled was kind of not a surprise. I mean, even from that time, that first kind of week where everything started changing in March, we had mentioned last week, even when I spoke with Rob Zayas, I'm sure he said something similar to you when you had him, when you were speaking with him on the phone, that the goal was never to try and just crown a state champion winner, just to do it. The whole idea was, how can we safely get back on the field and allow these students to play somehow so that they have something? Because at that point, it was already changing so fast. But it came a point where if the schools were going to reopen on May 15th and athletics were going to be part of that, how much time did you realistically have? Which leads into what happened 2 days later on Wednesday when Governor Cuomo announced that schools and academics would be closed in person for the rest of this academic year. And of course, the first thought I had was this likely ends the spring sports season too, which moments later, all sections in New York that hadn't already canceled their spring sports seasons did. So that is kind of where I saw most of the hope, that, hey, let's have the hope. Let's hold on that maybe we could get something in. And on Monday, when we were speaking with Rob Zayas, I don't know if you were on that press conference call, but he had a little press conference through Zoom and was saying we're still holding out hope. And I asked him, what is your role now as the executive director of the state? You've officially canceled the state portion. What is your role in spring sports now? And he said it was to help guide the sections as needed and advise them on how to have any kind of spring competition. But of course, 2 days later, on this past Wednesday, the schools were closed, and then moments later, all this member sections canceled. So that's kind of where, that's, I think, the most disappointing thing is that hope is now, the question marks are out of the air. It's spring sports are not going to happen for safety reasons. Of course, we can't necessarily argue why against the decision for safety, but it is definitely still deflating nonetheless.
I know some people are upset, and I totally understand that, but I have to give Dr. Zayas and his team and the sections a lot of credit. I mean, when you think about it, we're in one of the states that's been hit the hardest by this, and a lot of other states just went ahead and had canceled athletics a long time ago and had shut everything down, and they continually pushed and tried and kept that door open just a little bit, trying to make something happen. And at the end of the day, I felt like their hands were tied, and they had to, because the powers that be said, we just can't do it. But I do want to give them a little shout out and say they really tried. And I know that every time that I talk to them and talk to people in Section 4 that were in the Section 4 office, like, they were really trying to make something happen. And unfortunately, they just ran out of time, I think.
Yeah, I think the press release said that it was the 44th state. New York is the 44th state to cancel spring sports entirely.
Right.
And out of 50 states, that just shows that, yeah, to your point, after a state's been hit this hard, only 2 sections where it was, in Long Island area, like we mentioned last week, 8 and 11, I believe, right?
Yes.
They were the only 2 sections that had canceled anything, but everywhere else in the state was saying, hey, let's hold on, let's see. But once the governor made the decision that out of safety, the May 15th would no longer be an opening date, that is just the rest of the academic year, made sense. And honestly, so Nexstar, the company that I work for, so the television stations that I work for are owned by a company called Nexstar. There are many companies that own television stations in the country. Nexstar is currently the largest media owner in the United States. And they conducted a poll that said, the results came back from parents and anyone who participated in this online poll. And the overwhelming majority of people answered the question of when should schools reopen. The answer they gave overwhelmingly was next academic year. So it was kind of, it seems that from this, what the poll shows, that this is what people wanted also from a citizen standpoint, not just the governor making this decision upon everyone, but that people wanted it. We recognized that it was unrealistic. Of course, everyone's hoping, I spoke to some athletes, student athletes were hoping that maybe baseball, softball would get pushed into, summer ball, maybe the American Legion will play. Especially that same guy, Jason DeJesus, that I spoke with from Proctor Baseball, our biggest school here, that he was saying, this was my last chance to kind of prove myself as a senior going into college to play baseball and show what I can do, put that hard work in. So he was saying, hopefully we could play summer ball and things, which that's still a possibility, those summer leagues. We never know, but this is just the high school. But to connect the dots, one of the most interesting points that I think Director Zayas brought up in his press conference that I was on this week about New York State canceling their high school sports, that was on Monday, state tournaments, was that he was emphasizing the point that while it was unlikely, and he heard no discussions from anyone, even across the country, that they wanted to extend the high school season into the summer, into July and August, that it was a possibility that sections had the opportunity to go into the summer and play past, the end of the school year, that there were no rules, he said, that he was aware of that limited them to only having a season end when school ended. He only brought up the rule that spring season has to be only 15 weeks.
And I'll be very interested because in one of those press releases, they said they're immediately turning their focus to fall sports. And I've heard from a lot of athletic directors and coaches saying, if we couldn't get baseball and softball in, where you have a little distance, how are we going to play contact sports like football and even soccer where you're kind of rubbing elbows with someone? And then even farther down the road, when you think about wrestling or being like in a pool area for swimming, you wonder what's going to happen there. So I'm also curious, like you said, with American Legion Ball, like maybe to get kids something, if we get a little more clearance, if we could do something this summer with Legion Ball or Pony League or anything that would allow them to at least get out, no fans, as we've talked before, just kind of almost a scrimmage type of atmosphere. Because when we get to the fall, unless some things, have a major change, I don't know how they're going to pull this off. It's going to be really interesting times. So, I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it was I think I'm remembering that it was the same press release on Monday that had come out from the state when they canceled the state championships, that they were creating an ad hoc committee, forming one to discuss the fall football schedule and fall sport. And we got the Section 3 football schedule released about 2 or 3 weeks ago now. And of course, the first reactions I heard from people was, okay, hopefully it happens still, September 4th.
Yeah, right.
It's the biggest sports cliche ever. And in broadcast, so well, just like I do, that we're supposed to avoid cliches. But there's nothing else to say, really, being not an expert in health and understanding how viruses work, but being able to follow how things go. It's the biggest sports cliche. But the only thing we could say is we got to take it one day at a time. We report on it one day at a time. We find out the information one day at a time. But I think that's really got to be the mentality. We like to predict things. We like to think what's coming up. And it's definitely good to plan and say, hey, what about that? How can we work it out? And have those plans now. It's early May. Start planning for how it's possible to maybe social distance if we have to come fall, September, October, November. But we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how this virus works, even though people often compare it to the 1918 pandemic. We don't know whether it will go away this summer a little bit more. And in 1918, it came back stronger in the fall. They had even worse cases. So the worst thing we could do is just end social distancing and then have it start all over again. And now we're all quarantined for even longer. So just taking it one day at a time and realizing that, hey, I think they were correct in saying, we're going to start focusing on fall, but let's focus on, what may happen this summer first and see whether it's possible to get those kind of leagues in. And again, the point of sports, at least in my view, is not necessarily to win and crown the champion. And to explain what I mean by that, it's not like we're going to play sports right now. No one's coming at this, at least I don't think so, saying, man, we've got to have a state champion. What are we going to do without a state champion? Nothing else matters but crowning someone and holding up a trophy. That's totally that is a result, but that result is the goal that is set far ahead so that every other amazing moment in sports happens leading up to that. The highs, the lows, what did ABC, when ABC had the Olympics on their channel, it used to be the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. All those things of sport that we love. Can your team do it? The underdogs, the teams that are doing well, the streaks, the stats, the players, the team stories, all of that is happening because they want to achieve that end goal. But it's not because of we need a trophy. That's why we do sports. We need someone to win. We do sports because of everything in between.
And at the end of the day, I mean, I still talk to coaches like Bob Z at Unitigo for the girls basketball team. I mean, the state championships is a relatively new thing. I mean, he was coaching back in the 60s, and I want to say the state championship started in the mid to late 70s in New York, maybe early 80s. But he goes, you used to just play for your section, and that was it. Everyone went home. And yes, you had a sectional champion, but there was a time when it was kind of more localized and you didn't need to have this huge state championship. And don't get me wrong, I want the state championships eventually to come back because it's a really great thing. And I think it's what everyone thinks about and talks about, and we all love it. But at the same time, I totally agree. Like if we could just get some games in right now and have a little bit of normalcy and just the act of playing and sportsmanship and competitiveness, that would be really great to see.
Yeah, this is unfortunate example that we're going through in all of our lives right now with the pandemic, but it's a great example of what sports is about to me. I know I mention that often, but it really does have that meaning to me about why do we do sports, and that's something that means a lot to me because sports mean a lot to me, and to realize how sports work beyond just winning a game. And the thing is to get people on the field that have a scrimmage, a sense of normalcy, like you just mentioned. Couldn't have said that better. What sports serve us all for? Why do we love sports? And it's because it brings us together. I've mentioned that before. And and at this time, if we can do something, and it's safe to, where we've got scrimmages going on in games, that will bring that kind of normalcy that sports usually does. Bring something back normal, because nothing right now feels normal.
No.
Um,
Well, another thing I was thinking about is I think we can kind of look at pro sports, and that could be a little bit of a guideline on what the trickle down effect could be. If they could get some things going at their level, maybe we would get the green light to do some things at our level. And another big story this week, as we talked about, is the inductions at the Baseball Hall of Fame not going to happen. And you think about when they're willing to cancel the induction of a guy like Derek Jeter. That's a huge thing. So until things like that start to come back, I don't know how we're going to get it at the high school level. So that was a huge story this week, and you've told us a couple of times about the economic effect that the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown has on Otsego County and our area. So, what were your thoughts on that when you saw that news come down?
Well, it's a national story, right? So I'm in local news, and the Cooperstown, what I love is that it happens to be in our media market that I've described before. So that means I get to cover this. But it was cool the only good thing about this, or cool thing, was that I got to send an email to like 3,390 people with one click of a button after I did an interview with the Baseball Hall of Fame, and I got to send it to everyone in the company. That was kind of cool. Not every day you get to do that, but yeah, it's really unfortunate. Once the governor last weekend said that events that bring in large crowds, especially large crowds from other areas of the country, were not going to be allowed, I immediately was in contact with the Baseball Hall of Fame more frequently, sending an email each day, being in touch, and not pestering them, but just saying, hey, like, just want to keep up to date, make sure there's nothing, finding out what's important that people need to know, because once that was said, it was almost like, hey, did the governor make the decision for the Hall of Fame? That was expecting record numbers of people to
Oh,
come.
yeah.
I mean, 80,000 people maybe was kind of the average that they were saying of like the highs. They were expecting up to 100,000 people to attend. And that has the economic impact on the hotels. I found out this week in a story I did again about the cancellation that the hotel bed tax alone for Cooperstown, Otsego County, brought in $5 million last July alone to the county. $5 million just for people staying in hotels. And that's not the whole cost. That's just the hotel bed tax that is the largest contributor, I was told, to the Otsego County budget over a year. And that was last July alone, let alone the Hall of Fame bringing in the $150 million of tourism money a year out of the $206 million. So that's 75% almost. 3 of every $4 is the Hall of Fame. The biggest thing was that people I was told by the Hall of Fame and others that people had this on the calendars for 5 years. That 5 years coming from the fact that Derek Jeter retired 5 years ago, and everyone expected that 5 years later, being now, Derek Jeter would be elected to the Hall of Fame. And of course, that wound up being true. And, people had this planned, and it affects people from Cooperstown, Otsego County. Cassandra Harrington, the executive director of destination tourism marketing for Otsego County, told me this week that people are booking hotels in Syracuse, Albany, all over the state to just get close to this. And it is unfortunate. It's definitely, you got to keep in mind that safety, and that's what the Hall of Fame emphasized to me. Every time I asked them a question, it always ended with, we did this out of the safety. This is supposed to be a fun event. It's not something we're supposed to be risking our lives for. They said that all the 3 of the living inductees for this year were all behind the decision and understood it. But of course, just like any other sport or big sporting event, I mean, even like the Utica Comets here is something that brings people together so much in this area, the AHL ice hockey team. And like any other sport, if you're excited about something like this and sports brings us together, it's unfortunate that it has to be postponed. But I mean, again, the end result that they wanted to get across was it's about safety. It's canceled for this year, but it's not that it's not happening. Like the state tournaments aren't happening. We're not going to see Cooperstown versus Unatico girls basketball, unfortunately.
Right.
We are going to see Derek Jeter, Larry Walker, Ted Simmons, Marvin Miller inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2021. So it will happen. Like the quote was to me that the Hall of Fame said, everyone will just need to wait one more year.
Right. And I'm sure all those people all the diehards are going to find a way to come back, get that hotel, find a way to get here. Never ceases to amaze me where people will travel from to get to Cooperstown for induction weekend. It's pretty wild.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I started here on July 15th of 2019, and the induction weekend was that weekend. So like I had said, my 6th day on the job, I'm talking to Mariano Rivera, which is awesome, like absolutely phenomenal. The other side of that cool point was for 6th day on the job, there are 80,000 people around me at this event, and they're all so excited. They're all baseball fans like me. It's awesome. And it was that atmosphere was amazing. And everyone was talking about Derek Jeter then too. I mean, every interview I did last year was about Derek Jeter is going to be inducted next year.
Yeah.
The unanimous part didn't wind up working out as well as everyone had expected. But, of course, at least in my mind, and what Derek Jeter had said when asked about it initially, I'm inducted into the Hall of Fame. I'm inducted into the Hall of Fame. You get 75%, you're in. So 99.7% is good too.
Good.
I'll take 75% to get inducted into the Hall of Fame.
Right.
75%, good with me. But I mean, you're closer. You live closer, right, to Cooperstown in the Hall of Fame area than I do. I'm about an hour away here in Utica. How's the community? What's your sense of how the community is feeling from discussions you've had just about, this is like also they live there. And I was speaking to one of the Cooperstown girls basketball players this week for those features I'm still doing. And I said, hey, like, you live in Cooperstown. How's it going to be different to not have a huge amount of visitors in your town where you're from? Like, there are people from Cooperstown. So what is your sense of how they've been reacting to this?
I think, much like you said, they've had this on the calendar since Jeter retired, and they've been thinking about, wow, the crowd is usually this big, and now it's going to be this big. And I think people were just excited to see it. They get excited and look forward to it every year. I think it's a little bit of a love-hate because you can go from being in a sleepy small town to you can't, like, you're parking on the outskirts of town trying to walk in. It can be crazy. So I think there's a little love-hate with that, but I think they love having the attention and welcoming everybody into the community as well. They seem to do a great job with that. Everyone's friendly. It's a great place to go. So I think they're bummed as well. This was going to be their time to shine once again and to try to do it bigger and better than ever before. So I definitely think they're upset. And last year I went up and I helped the Cooperstown Booster Club. They had a little Gatorade and water booth as you go into the inductions. And that was so much fun working with those student athletes and Booster Club members and teachers and parents. And we just had a blast doing that. And to see all the different colorful characters that were walking in with their jerseys and their hats and painted faces. So I think everyone's going to miss all the fun stuff that goes along with it too. So I'm going to miss it. I don't know, half an hour from Cooperstown. I go there a lot for just daily life type of stuff. And, it's going to be weird to not have that kind of circled on the calendar.
I think it was Natalie Fountain this week who was mentioning to me that Booster Club where they would do the fundraiser. Because that's when I asked her kind of how is it going to be different, she said, well, first of all, people will be coming here. But second, we would raise money for our class. I think she mentioned specifically it was something about her, like them raising money for their prom, things like that. Which then also not happening this year, which is obviously the list of unfortunate things goes on, and it will be remembered forever. That's for sure. So the one thing everyone's saying is this will be remembered forever. You're never going to forget this.
No.
But I think she was mentioning that whole idea of how the student athletes are also involved in the Hall of Fame induction weekend, like you just mentioned.
The school gets really involved. The kids get involved. The teachers get involved. So that's been a neat connection for me to have, just to learn what they do and how the town comes together. It really takes everybody to pull that off because it is such a small town. They need all hands on deck, volunteers, security people. That was fun to kind of get a sneak peek at that last year. So it'll be different for sure in mid-July.
But it will. The thing is, as we take everything one day at a time, this will happen. And John Shostakovsky, the VP of Communications for the Baseball Hall of Fame, told me this, and I was totally already thinking this myself and agree that it will just mean that much more when we do celebrate this together in 2021. It seems so far away. It is far away. But in the grand scheme of things, we will get there, and it will just be awesome to be together again. And by the way, I just want to mention, I think I might have misspoken earlier by saying that all spring sports for the sections were canceled on Wednesday. It was Monday was the New York State canceling the state tournaments. Wednesday was the Hall of Fame announcing the cancellation.
Right.
And Friday was when the spring sports were canceled. So that's the every other day. I think I just mixed up earlier the Friday and Wednesday. So it was state tournament canceled Monday. Wednesday was the Hall of Fame canceling, and Friday was the all spring sports canceled. So just a wild week. But I do want to tell you that last night, Saturday night, I ended my week, I guess. The every other day thing. I watched the movie Hoosiers. Have you ever seen it?
Oh yeah, one of my favorites.
Okay. So I did a story with Tyler Bertram, who I know you know from Cooperstown.
Oh yeah.
Central School graduate. Also, he went to Vermont Academy his senior year, and he's transferring to Binghamton University, that's in your Section 4 area, and him graduating from Cooperstown is my coverage area in Section 3. So I did a story with him on Friday about him transferring, and so I go back into the archives of my station. I find all these archived videos. Thank goodness we have stuff of him playing in high school, right?
Oh yeah.
I noticed in the background, and you might remember this because I wasn't here to see it at the time, but in like 2017, 2018, one of those years, the Cooperstown bench, while David Bertram, his dad, was still the head coach, they're wearing these like baggy pants on the bench with like orange and black stripes vertically.
Oh
and
yeah.
like these big silk looking shiny jackets. I took a picture on my phone and I texted him and I was like, okay, I told you I was going to have a lot of questions, but you've got to explain this first. And he tells me it's the movie Hoosiers, which I actually happened to have bought earlier this year prior to every store closing. I actually have the DVD, and I was like, well, I guess I have to watch it this weekend to understand what you mean. So I watched it last night, and it's for those who might not know, maybe I'm just the oddball out. I know I have a ton of movies that I have to catch up on in life, so I understand. But I caught up on one now. And last night, so I watched Hoosiers, which is about an Indiana. It's based on a true story of an Indiana high school, small town school that got a new coach and wound up going on to win the state championship. And a lot of the movie, from the sports fan perspective, is about the action of how this team goes from, they're good apparently, but they got a new coach. They had one player who was really good and everyone kind of worked together, and how they go through the underdog story of doing well in their season. They win through sectionals, and Indiana called it sectionals too. Then they're in the regionals round of the regionals round of Indiana State, and then they went to the finals. And how they win. It's not a spoiler, by the way. I didn't give it away. It's on it's like in the trailer that they win. So, so they win. But I mean, wow, watching that at a time like this. Seeing the fans and the crowd and the cheering and the games and the suspense, even though they're going to win, the suspense, the storylines. I almost forgot for a moment that that's what we miss right now. That's what we're missing. We didn't have. I can't even imagine if that true story about, I think it's called Milan is the town, Milan, Indiana.
Yes. Yep.
Imagine this team wins sectionals and then there's a pandemic. Is this movie made?
That's a very good point. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, because if they don't go on that run, even if they go on that run and lose that game, you always wonder if they would make a movie like that.
I think if they lost the final game, they would have still made the movie. But I'm thinking you win sectionals, which is huge. Also, they won sectionals. I don't know if it was their first time ever, but clearly first time in a long time, and they were excited. But imagine it's like, all right, you're going to play in this big arena. Like there's a scene where they're like, wow, look at this arena. We've never seen a building this big. And then the day before, they're like, sorry, we're postponing it. And 2 weeks later, they're canceling it. Which I'm not saying that as they just did it here in real life. It's because of a pandemic. I can't emphasize that enough. But if the story isn't there that they win the state championship, I'm just making the comparison of those are the stories that we're missing, and that's why it hurts so much for the players, for us, for fans, because you don't know what could have happened. That's the biggest phrase I hear being used. So does this movie get made? I was watching it last night, excited to see it, and feeling like, wow, look at this state championship, like this is exciting. And I
Yeah.
forgot for a moment that that's exactly what we don't have right now.
Yeah, I get in trouble for quoting it a lot around the house. Because my girlfriend had never seen it, and when Jimmy Chitwood at the end says like, "Coach, I'll take it."
Yep.
Like anytime I'm like taking the garbage out or anything, I'll be like, "I'll take it." She's like, "Just stop, please, just stop." So
what a good way to use that too. Wow. Like, I mean, I of course I just watched it last night, so I'm just like thinking of the moment of the scene. Just like, that was an interesting scene too, because and we're going into a movie review show. But
yeah,
all the coach, it's funny because the coach is trying to get them to follow rules the whole way through the sport, and he's trying to discipline them and get them to follow, and it winds up working. But in the state games, the regionals and then the championship game, there are multiple times where the coach tries to give them instructions and the team says, we think this might work better. And he's like, okay, fine. And then it winds up working. So the team almost took ownership for it, which I think is a cool part of team dynamics. You know, when your team starts learning how to lead itself and working well, and it worked.
it's on my bucket list to get out and see that gym which was their home gym there. It's open for tours, and you can go and shoot around there if you want. So I would love to go see that gym sometime. It's on my bucket list.
I kid you not. I bet you there will be movies made about this pandemic. So you and I better get ahead on it and do like Unity Go Cooperstown.
Yeah.
Got like pro ice hockey also, and Utica College men's ice hockey, and we could do a whole. We'll call it the cross section.
The cross, yeah.
Oh, anyone who just saw that, if there are bees, I will run away.
Killer bees, man. Dang. Yeah, be careful.
What about these murder bees, these murder hornets?
Yeah. Well, on a strange side note, a hobby that I have is I am a beekeeper. So I've been doing a lot of reading on the murder bees, and I really hope they don't show up here because we're already in enough trouble with bees.
Well, they're in the United States
tough.
now, so just Central New York. That's the one thing I really enjoy about winter in Central New York. And yes, I said enjoy about winter in Central New York, is that there are no bees around. And I like bees, I like flowers, but like I will run away. That's fine. It's totally.
So you don't want to come down to the hive sometime when I open it up and they're all flying around?
Yeah, no. I will not unless I know I'm guaranteed that they're not going to come at me. But
okay.
At Syracuse, we'll go back to sports in a second. But at Syracuse University, there was lavender that would grow at this time of year, and I would walk down the path, and I loved the lavender, and I loved the smell of it. And sometimes I'd put my hand on it as I'd walk by and just kind of grab one of the branches, not rip it or anything, but just touch it, and then I'd smell, and then I'd get little leaves and the petals, and it would smell like lavender because that's what lavender smells like. And I reached my hand out last year, and I touch it, and I feel something fuzzy, and I was like, that was odd. And I realized I'm holding a bumblebee, like not the stinging ones, but the giant honeybees, the bumblebees. I was like, okay, I'm not doing that ever again. But I didn't know that you were into bees. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, my dad did it, and so kind of growing up, I got into it. And I mean, it's just we do it for fun. We do get some honey that we keep for family and friends, and we do sell it. But yeah, it's a fun hobby, and I've always enjoyed it. But yeah, it takes a little bit of getting used to have everything swarming around you like that. It's strange.
Yeah,
so.
It's so how did the Oneonta Yellow Jackets feel about that?
Well, I mean, I figure it gets me in better with any school that is a Hornet or a Yellow Jacket or a Bee. You know, I must have a free pass with them, right? So
yeah. So I speaking of bees and that good Yellow Jacket transition back to sports, I know that the one other thing that came up this week that was really interesting was you did a podcast, episode 23 already. Obviously, you should watch the cross section and then you go on to the Nate Lowe podcast.
Yeah.
So, I know that we were talking a little bit about it. I'm curious to just hear more from you, just about some kind of, I feel like that podcast was about your conversation was about looking ahead, even though it was about the sections and maybe reclassification kind of stuff, or whether schools would be able to maintain their independent kind of sporting. But I feel like that's kind of a look ahead. So I feel like that's a good way to maybe close out today's conversation with just kind of a look ahead, maybe towards some normalcy, even though these just, about normal or more normal discussions about
Yeah,
sport.
I spoke with Unadilla Valley Superintendent Bob Mackey, and he's been in charge of a little bit of a study over the last 6 months to a year that goes with other superintendents, athletic directors, and coaches in Section 4. And they're getting together and they're looking at the numbers. They had a 5-year snapshot from the past and what it might project out to be in terms of school enrollment out to 2024. And they were basically saying if we continue along the same trends, not every school, but a majority of the schools, we would not have enough to have many sports teams in our schools in terms of having multiple sports in fall, winter, spring, and in some cases, not enough to just even have one soccer team at all. So the study was really looking into what can we do? How do we get ahead of this now? Do we need to look at a possible merger of leagues? Because they're thinking that more schools might merge services for sports. So then if your league goes from 12 teams to 7, are you then playing the same teams all the time? Are you having to play the same teams 4 or 5 times in a year? So nothing's set in stone. If you want to listen to the podcast, I think people are falling on both sides of the fence on if they like the ideas, if they don't. But the main thing is it's not set in stone. They're just trying to get ahead of this, because if we wait until 2024, the data shows us that it could be too late for a lot of schools, and we might be saying, okay, we're not giving student athletes opportunities to play anymore. And then that's really scary. And the other part that he ties in is state aid. And with this whole COVID-19 thing, are we going to be getting less state funding? And how do we keep sports going there? That might push us to have to share services even more if our budgets are cut by anywhere from 20 to 50% because of COVID-19. So he just had a lot of great numbers to share.
I'd be interested to hear that. What kind of insight did you talk about? Or if you didn't talk about it, what kind of insight did you kind of get from this about the whole Worcester-Skenevis situation where they're planning on merging in a few years down the line here?
We didn't specifically talk about that, but that is a great example of what he's talking about, where 2 small schools, declining enrollment. And the other thing is not only declining enrollment, there's just a little percentage of kids now that's, even if they're in school, they're deciding not to play sports at all, or they might only play one sport. So we talked about kind of the continuing disappearance of the 3-sport athlete. And we're mostly talking about schools in our area that are Class C and Class D. Some of the bigger schools aren't going to have this problem. We were specifically looking at those size schools. So they're already, Skenevis is a tough example because they're struggling financially. He's talking about even schools that are very healthy financially having to do this just because they don't have the numbers. And I'm already covering soccer teams as of last year that had 10, 11 guys. So if anybody gets hurt, when you have 11 guys, you're playing a man down. So if we're seeing it now, what are we going to see in 3-4 years? I don't know what the answer is. He puts out a lot of things. There's been some positive feedback, some negative feedback, but a lot of places don't want to lose their identity, their history, their identity. And that makes it a very difficult decision.
And we mentioned last week when you were saying that this podcast was coming up, we mentioned the whole idea of Westmoreland and Oriskany combining for boys soccer this year and how it became the Westmoreland team. And of course they went by that. They did well. They made it to this, they lost the sectional finals on penalty kicks, which is hard. But it just goes to show how well they did in their first year combined. That's a lot of people who never played together. So I'd be curious to check in with them at some point about how did they feel about their identity? And did Westmoreland feel less of a change than Oriskany did because they were called the Westmoreland Bulldogs still?
Right.
But it is a reality. Definitely, we talk about the financial stuff of the Hall of Fame and the impact on sports. There's a financial aspect of education and how things are set up. And I would definitely understand the whole idea of not wanting to, even if it's a merger, you become like the Westmoreland Oriskany Bulldogs or whatever it was. You have both things, both names. But everyone, there's that whole pride aspect of sports, but even just being part of your community and school that I can
And
understand.
And he talked a lot about that. And he goes, sometimes I think we get really caught up in that. And he goes, as we should, but at some point, do we say, okay, look, if we don't kind of put that aside, are our kids going to have no opportunities? So
Yeah.
what's worse, giving up a little bit of your history and your tradition so that your kids can still play? I don't know. People are very torn on that. I'm torn on it because
I wouldn't actually say that it's giving up the history. It's almost it's no longer having the future of just being you, just being
Right.
one town, but it's not. It's not. Yeah, it's interesting, that idea that some people might feel you're giving up the history. We've always been. I'm going to keep using Westmoreland Oriskany as the example because why not? But we've always been a Oriskany. We've always
Right.
been Oriskany boys soccer. We have these accolades and everything as a Oriskany. Remember, we're going to be Westmoreland? What do you mean? We're going to be rooting for Westmoreland, our crosstown rivals, for every other sport and thing we do.
Right.
But it almost brings communities together in an interesting way, which is why it was such an interesting story to cover this past fall.
Yeah, it was an interesting episode. I've gotten a lot of good feedback. So if anyone wants to listen, Bob is also the superintendent that I spoke with, is also very open to talking to other people about it. I know he's gotten a lot of questions, and it's kind of reignited the conversation, and it kind of died down because we had been so worried about so many other things. And he goes, Nate, I appreciate that you brought it up, and we can think more about it, because now that we stir in this COVID-19 aspect to it with budgets and everything, it's going to add a whole new layer to it. So it's scary to think. We don't know what we would. I like it because I don't know who are we going to be covering in 4 years. Are we going to be covering Binghamton versus Utica? And it's just regional schools. I mean, I have no idea. So
Yeah.
It's interesting on all levels.
It will be interesting to see. I think at the end of the day, it really is, like you just mentioned, the idea of those that adapt survive. And I think history in many ways has proven that those who try and hold out only on their own, even in mutually declining situations, which is, again, it's out of anyone's control, whether school populations going down and whatnot. But if that's just a reality, those that can adapt and say, okay, let's partner together, let's do this, I think that will allow the opportunities to continue, which is, again, the most important thing, rather than just saying we're not going to have any athletics at all. That would be totally an adverse effect of trying to maintain your independence.
I know the small schools, the D schools, are really struggling with it because they feel like they're the ones that are going to have to give up their identity. They're the ones that would be the most affected by it compared to maybe some of the bigger schools. But I mean, the numbers are hurting even some of the bigger schools from the data that he showed me. So we'll really have to see. I'm glad that they're at least meeting and talking about it. I think that's good to be proactive.
So looking ahead, the other thing is that this week was supposed to be when the girls all-state teams were announced, but they've kind of pushed that a week ahead. I don't know if you know why they might have done that. Maybe they were reassessing things, but or it could have just been how crazy this week was with state athletics that the Writers Association kind of said, let's just put a brakes on this for a moment.
They are going to release it on Wednesday, May 6th. It's not uncommon. If they were lacking some information, they wanted to double check things. A lot of times when it gets this close, they like to go back to all the writers and reporters and make sure that they have all the spellings correct. They fact check a lot of things. They want to make sure that this player is a junior and not a senior, because when they print that list, they want it to be as perfect as possible, because it's such a big award and a big deal. So it could have been something like that. I didn't get any sort of indication. It very well could be that it was such a crazy week that they said, let's push it off. But I'm glad it's only a week. Sometimes I've seen they've delayed it several weeks. So it's nice that we'll have it on Wednesday.
Well, something to look forward to for next week, and I'm looking forward to talking with you about it then. you.